to you all our esteemed Chief Guest, Honorable Union Minister, Government of India, Dr. Jitendra Singh, who has been a former professor in the Department of Medicine, GMC Jammu. Vidya Dadati Vinyam, Vinyam Gati Patratam, Patratvat Dharma Punoti, Dhanam Dhar Tathasana. One is able to perform his duties in a better way.
Endocrinologists will be delivering lectures on thyroid disorders. So I'm sure that you are going to cherish all these upcoming sessions.
AFMC Pune. I would also like to welcome Dr. Shashi, Principal, AFMC Jammu, and organizing chairman of this event, and Dr. Kotwal, head of Atithi Devo Bhava. I would like to request Dr. Shashi Sudan Sharma.
A senior advisor in medicine and endocrinology. The enthusiast is in national health planning and monitoring standard treatment protocols, always leading by his personal example. His contributions have been recognized as many awards, medals, and commendations. We are indebted to him for sparing his time. Lives of men remind us we can make our life sublime while walking and leave behind us footprints on sands of time. Our organizing chairman of the academic event today, Dr. R.P. Kudyar, who has endeared himself to one and all in Jammu by his healing clinical touches, the senior most endocrinologist of the region and former director principal ESCOMS and professor and head medicine GMC Jammu, is an epitome of empathetic professional courtesy. The three enlightened and accomplished sons of the soil on the dais to bestow their grace and wisdom is a dream come true and a unique, unprecedented experience for this institution. My young dynamic colleague, Dr. Suman Kotwal, the organizing secretary of Thyrocon and the chief architect of the event, deserves all applause. Esteemed invitees of the dais, former principals, former HODs, faculty colleagues to enlighten us all and ever encourage us to keep us move forward in our patient and student-centric efforts. The organization is fast emerging as a multi-dimensional growth model of more focused approach on preventive health, promotive health, and palliative health also, in addition to the dynamically evolving curative and rehabilitative healthcare, and since inception by the contributions of all great ones, has always been the solitary tertiary healthcare public health facility, providing equitable, accessible, and affordable health care, which is further optimizing by the Ayushman Bharat Sehat scheme for the masses of Jammu. I hope the deliberations of this CME further fine-tune the skills of this distinguished and august audience and delegates, my faculty colleagues, residents, students, and my paramedic support staff. May we seek unlimited grace from our worthy chief guest for Professors Emeriti program under University Grants Commission, establishment of a medical university, and upgradation of GMC Jammu to Shere Dugar Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences be our next successful endeavors. Jai Hind.
On the dais, our very dynamic principal, Dr. Shashi Sudan. Just as COVID came as an adversity and brought out the virtue out of us, I think COVID also brought out the best out of her. We saw her working during the most difficult times. Our guest of honor, whom many of us saw as a captain, he's a general today. And I think the first ever endocrinologist in India who has grown to the rank of Lieutenant General. And I think I'm too humble to refer to Professor R.P. Kudayar, being one of the founding faculties of this institute, a mentor and a teacher to almost 3 generations, and has been a distinguished medical professional right from his undergraduate days, when he was one of the favorites of late Dr. Nasir Ahmed Shah to this day. And of course, Dr. Suman, whom I'm meeting today for the first time, but I heard of him from Dr. Zargar, I think under whom he was working at the Saura Institute. Members of the faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I have to congratulate the organizers for holding this event. And I'm glad that I could make myself available for this and be a part of this. And to be very honest, I have been receiving invitations quite often, time and again, from the institute and also from Principal Dr. Sudan. But somehow I'm so hard pressed. And incidentally, I was here last night and I have to go back to Mumbai. So I could make the best of it, and I'm glad that the timing was appropriate. It's always a pleasure and also a gratifying experience being back to GMC Jammu and see it grow from one level to the other. I, for one, are among those who've seen this institute right from the day of inception, growing inch by inch, brick by brick, right from the day when Dr. N.S. Patania, the founding principal, started the first ever batch of MBBS in barracks, because you didn't have a building of your own. And then, of course, the institute, having been founded in 1970s, evolved over the next few decades, which also incidentally happened to be decades when the medical education was evolving in this country. The 70s and 80s, when Dr. Kudayar and others joined the institute, was also the time, in the context of today's conference dedicated to a super specialty, when the DM and MCH courses were being introduced in different institutes of the country. And as far as endocrinology, the subject chosen today, I believe Dr. Dash was the first ever endocrinologist in 1970s. And then, of course, the first generation, the first among all of them, was Dr. Kudayar for Jammu and Kashmir. So we have seen those times when these early batches of super specialists coming out with their DM and MCHs were struggling to set up super specialty departments because they had a lot of passion. But I think the best way to kill the passion is to take up a government job. So gradually they worked, they fatigued, got tired, but at the end of the day, they did their best. I remember Dr. Kudayar being at pains, calling inspection teams time and again to get approvals, and having accomplished to an extent, may not be fully. And therefore, it's also a vindication of sorts to see today Dr. Suman and others accomplishing, if not wholly, at least to a great extent, what was envisaged by the early generation in this specialty. And therefore, as far as chirology or the theme of this conference is concerned, I think like many other components of endocrinology, thyroid not only lacked much of understanding among the medical faculty, but also much of awareness in the public. In spite of the fact that even in a small territory like Jammu and Kashmir, we have almost 12 to 13% of prevalence of thyroid diseases. And our Himalayan belt, to which all the three of us, Suman, me and Dr. Kotwal, belong, the district of Doda has been notorious for goiters. Even my mother had one. But even then, we've seen those times evolving from primitive stage when goiter was known as a curse of the god. कि पिछले जन्म का कर्म था वो गिल्टी दे दी उसने. And I remember when we were in institute at the AIMS for a while, which was at the behest of Dr. Kotwal, we had a candidate doing goiters, a thesis on goiter, and very frequently he would travel either to Kishtwar or to Arunachal Pradesh. Incidentally, his guide was Dr. Nikhil Tandon, who today happens to be the head of endocrinology at the AIMS. So to that extent, I think you also deserve to be complimented, Suman, that when you organize an event like this, you are not only upgrading or updating the faculty, you are also creating a certain amount of awareness in the public about the various facets and various dimensions of disorders related to thyroid. And to that extent, I think even the other components of endocrinology have somehow missed out in the public domain. There's much little understanding about them, even still is. And to most of the people, endocrinology is all about diabetes. And to the endocrinologist also, he's happy being known as a diabetes man because that fetches good money. So at the end of the day, the casualty is the other components. Like for example, in late 90s, we came across, all of you know, I won't name him because he's also a good friend now, and very recently I got him join BJP, one of the star icons of WWF, the wrestler. So he came there for a medical checkup because he had to join a police job, he'd been selected. So we residents were assigned to do the investigations, found he had growth hormone issues, he had acromegaly, 8.5 feet tall. He is now a star. Now that is what got him make a fortune, become one of the richest persons. Luckily, he is now back to India, started his own academy. So that was the first time I saw him. So out of my curiosity, I asked the attendants, who also happened to be a police functionary, I said, how do you recruit such individuals in the police force, because a lot of running around involved. So he said कि साहब हमारे यहाँ पे हर साल एक tournament होता है all India basketball. So this guy just goes and drops the ball, and every year we stand first. So you can see how non-seriously a disorder like acromegaly was being treated, which we know is accompanied with so much of morbidity and sometimes also mortality. Of course, then they prescribed him some bromocriptine, etc., which I don't know he's taking. I asked him recently, he's even forgotten that because he's become such a big man now. So I think this is also, in a way, an initiative or an attempt to create awareness, because now the society is becoming so global that you have to have awareness levels intermixing between the medical professional and the patient and the public in large. And many of the institutes have also started a practice, because I keep traveling. Last week I was in Chennai. Today we have an NRI medicos meet in Mumbai this evening. Next week I'll be at Indore. Many of the medical institutes like this have started their own in-house arrangement of having one CME coupled with a public awareness lecture on the same subject every week. Not depending on the pharma CMEs, because they have their own agenda, their own objective, and their own priorities also of disseminating knowledge. But in an institute like this, so I think we could, in course of time as we are evolving, could also take some of the good practices happening, because the knowledge explosion is so much, and the doubling time has increased. Doubling time, as we talk in medical parlance, the time when a textbook needs to be brought out with the next edition. So when we were in MBBS, it was about 4 years or so. By the time we became postgraduates, about 3 years. By the time we passed out, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 volumes of Harrison. Price was outdated, the textbook. So with that kind of thing, I think what we learned in our formal courses or syllabi becomes very soon outdated, except for the basic sciences. And that, I think, is something that we have to actually address the issue, because from specialty we graduated into super specialties, and now we are into super subspecialties. A day is not far and you'll have a separate doctor for hyperthyroid and separate for hypo. I don't know which way someone will go, but he has time enough to make a choice. The other day, I was being narrated an anecdote by Sadhguru ji, the famous godman from Bangalore. He was telling me that he had gone to Australia. In his hotel room, he developed a knee sprain. So he asked the hotel to arrange a doctor for him. So after about 10 minutes, the doctor didn't come, but he received a phone call, and they asked him what was he complaining in the knee. So he started telling them. It took him about 4 or 5 minutes, repeated questions being asked by the female on the other side. So somehow he got impatient and irritated. He said, in any case, doctor is going to come, so why are you asking me so many questions? He said, no, we have to determine what kind of orthopedic surgeon do you require. Because we have orthopedic surgeons specializing in trauma, we have those specializing in arthritis, we have those specializing in nodular disease, etc., etc. So he was telling me, I got so fed up, I asked them, please don't ask me the next question, whether the knee is right one or the left. So, but that, having said in the lighter way, is going to be an issue which is already being confronted. And therefore, I think this is a good initiative, and involving some of the senior persons like Dr. Kotwal to be a part of this exercise. And before I conclude, because once a teacher is always a teacher, you always look for captive audience. And I have one today. Just to flag off two issues which have been of concern. One of the universal concern, second more in the context of India. That one of universal concern which I have been talking about, and which others also, even in European and American medical schools, including Harvard, is that with the increasing amount of technology available with us, our investigative, our diagnostic capabilities becoming more specific, of course, also more sensitive, more precise, more time-saving. Somewhere the focus has shifted away from clinical medicine. And I'm sure none else but Dr. Kotwal would be able to bear that out, because he belongs to that generation. Maybe I belong to the last generation of that genre. And therefore, that is a concern being expressed even by some of the best physicians in the US. Because, as Hippocrates says, a doctor is a doctor when he is of service to the society, even when he has no instruments, no investigation reports, no medicine at his disposal. But here, can we deliver that kind of a, because unless we have the investigations. And traditionally, at the bottom of the investigation report, it is always written, please correlate with clinical details. Now it's happening the other way around. The clinical details are written after seeing the report. I don't grudge that. I think it's a healthy development, because this didn't happen earlier. Because when we came in, even ultrasound was just happening, and then CT scan, and now. And now, of course, the artificial intelligence taking over our own intelligence. But deprived of all this, in disaster situations like we saw in Ukraine, when you have nothing, you don't have any investigation facilities, how do you then justify yourself? Maybe it sounds a little difficult, or maybe you are not able to understand, to many of you who have not seen those times, but I think we belong to the Golwala times, when now even the selection is done mostly on the written basis. Now it has its merits, because I was the one who drafted that rule for abolition of interviews, because we had complaints that viva voce interview was the component which caused most of discrimination, nepotism, etc., etc. But then in professions like this one, how do you test the skills or the aptitude of the individual? So that is something I think we'll have to ponder about, all of us who are associated with the business of medical teaching, and this is something which is being pondered all across the world now. As I said, and even the selection, because earlier on, at least in the earlier times, the selection to the post-graduation was done primarily on the basis of the clinical performance. Now it's the other way around. In the last 2-3 years when I was here as a professor, I would find parents coming to me asking me that their children who were interns could be spared to go to library so that they could prepare for the PG exam. It was just the other way around in our times. They would sit in the ward rather than in the library because that was the gateway to selection. And then they would teach us. Like for example, if a person with a pale sallow look enters your chamber, what is it? A, if he's elderly, maybe uremia, CRF. B, if he's young lady, maybe pregnancy, anemia, pigmentation. C, maybe it's a young child, it's hookworm anemia. So that's how it went on. So I'm not sure, and this is an issue because not at all times and in all situations you have all the armamentarium at your disposal. That reminds me of an anecdote that was narrated to us by one of our teachers called Dr. Narendra Swami. He was a topper in MBBS. He stood first in the university. And he wanted to become a gynecologist and obstetrician and gynecologist because he was highly inspired by Dr. Mudaliar. Dr. Mudaliar, as the old-timers would know, was the world-renowned gynecologist. The textbook, Mudaliar's textbook of obstetrics, was prescribed all over the world. The Britishers knighted him. He was known as Sir Lakshman Swami Mudaliar. And then the Britishers only appointed him as the Vice Chancellor of Madras University, which was the second oldest university in India, the first one being the Calcutta University, where Dr. Sama Prasad Mukherjee was the Vice Chancellor. So Dr. Narendra Swami would tell us that when he appeared for the post-graduation Viva Voce, very confidently that he was the topper, so he would get the stream of his choice. Incidentally, the expert happened to be none else than Dr. Mudaliar, and Dr. Mudaliar rejected him. He says he came back highly dejected, not knowing what had gone wrong. And the next few days, since he was quite disturbed, the hostelers told him to seek an appointment with Dr. Mudaliar. Maybe there was some gap of communication, etc. And he says when he went there to Professor Mudaliar, Sir Mudaliar said, "Look here, boy, I've done you a great favor. When I was interviewing you in the Viva Voce, I was very minutely observing your fingers." And Narendra Swami was just about 4.5 feet tall and very small fingers. And he said, "I can say for sure your fingers are not appropriately designed or meant for performing obstetric procedures. And if you become an obstetrician, you would end up as a failure and frustrated all your life. And therefore, I have prompted you to take up another stream." Now, when you are depending solely on one component, not on the other, how would you test these skills and the aptitudes? That's, I think, one question, because this is a vicious cycle. Very fondly, we have taken up all the technology, but we are at the risk of our own intelligence being taken over by the artificial intelligence. I leave it that because that is something that we will be, I think, very seriously thinking. And even the medical fraternity, the teaching fraternity also adapts itself to like that. Because when I know my student is going to get through into post-graduation only through the written, so I also focus on that. Like for example, during COVID, I was telling the boys at the AIMS, I said, my generation of teachers is guilty of, on one account, that we stopped teaching infections and concentrated more on non-communicable disease, believing that infections were over, and suddenly COVID happened. But hats off to these young residents. Overnight, they prepared themselves to face that challenge. Because to us, we thought we were not going to have this kind of a catastrophe again. It was all about type 2 diabetes mellitus, coronary artery, etc., etc. The second issue, which is in the Indian context strictly, is Indian research, Indian data, and Indian solutions to Indian problems. I have been raising these questions. Unfortunately, it has now started creating a lot of anxiety even in the best of the institutes across the country. Did you ever realize we have the highest number of publications going out from this country? We have the highest number of papers being published. Our Mohan's Institute, Dr. Kotwal knows very well, has been topping in the diabetes publications for the last 3-4 years across the world. But where is the Indian data? And where is the Indian indigenous Indian research. So that is the issue now. So Indian solutions for Indian problems, Indian regimens for Indian diseases. And unfortunately, the Westerners are making use of our huge, large resource pool. The other day I was telling the Switzerland ambassador, I said, you name any disease, because he's a doctor. I said, name any disease, we will give you here in India. You won't find elsewhere, because we're such a heterogeneous society. Whether it's a non-communicable disease, whether it's communicable disease. People are coming from outside India. If you go to General Hospital Madras, outside the pathology department, you find a small plaque. It is written, this is the room where Dr. Donovan sat, the famous Donovan bodies. And even in the terms of the non-communicable disease, where we think, because of course, tropical disease is exclusive to India. We still, a few years ago, we used to get interns from UK at the AIMS to be posted in the tuberculosis leprosy wards. But even in non-communicable disease, Indian phenotype is different. Our predispositions are different. About 15, 18 years back, we did a small study which was published in JAPI on the central obesity. Like, for example, the typical feature here is that it's almost equally prevalent in males and females in India. It's not so in West. If it is in the males, about 65%, maybe about 63, 62% of females. And central obesity, as many of us belonging to this specialty know, is an independent risk factor, independent of the overall obesity, for all the metabolic disorders, including type 2 diabetes mellitus or the coronary diseases. Westerners apparently look bulky, but they have very little visceral fat. We actually did a study using CT scans and could prove that. Now, luckily our dress culture is such, if it is a lady with a big belly, you have a 10-meter long Banarsi sari. If it's a gentleman with a big belly, you have a fancy kurta. So it doesn't look, but that is the storehouse of the disease. So we have to have our own data. This is just, I'm citing an example for that matter. And even in those disorders where we think we are uniform, we are not exactly so. Like, for example, the gestational diabetes mellitus guidelines, which have now been also approved by the WHO. I must compliment Dr. Kudiyar. Under his guidance, I did a paper which was also taken up by Dr. Seshaya, and the group headed by Dr. Seshaya, of which I am a member, did that guidelines which have now been accepted by the WHO as well. Our target levels, our extent of glycemic control. So we are so much different. We claim to be different otherwise. So why not at least in data? And therefore, I think these are some of the issues which the medical institutes, the research institutes across the country. Luckily today we have a Prime Minister who has for the first time brought health into focus, who's personally monitoring, and we have much of potential, which, as I said, was evident from COVID itself. Of the 6-7 departments that I handle, one is that of biotechnology. Within 2 years, we could come out with 2 first ever vaccines in the world. The first ever DNA vaccine and the first ever nasal vaccine. And I told some of the American counterparts, I said, don't forget, these vaccines are coming from a country where preventive healthcare is not known of. Even if one falls sick, they leave it to God to take him up close to him or leave him to look after the family. Both ways is God's duty. Either you will serve in his feet or you will serve in the feet of your children. From where we could show the world, we could also supply to 130 countries. So India's vaccine story is actually an indication and evidence of the huge lot of potential that we have amongst us. And thankful to Prime Minister Modi that he's not only increased the budget, he also gave focus, gave primarily our bioeconomy. We talk of startups now, Dr. Shashi referred to. Unfortunately, because the startup concept was taken up from the West, we don't realize the startup is not about IT, it's not about science alone, it's about innovation. Close to Dr. Kotwal's town happened the birth of Purple Revolution. We have about 3,000 startups, agri startups in Lavender, making lakhs out of that. There are hardly any graduates, most of them class 12. So we have that huge resource which is exclusive to us. But then what can we do as medical fraternity, because we are also part of the larger family of biotechnology, is that larger integration. When we work in silos, we do not know what is happening in the next room. And the example happened recently, I think 2 years back, and I'm glad that Dr. Shashi was kind enough to accept that suggestion. We have close here, about 4 kilometers away, an institute called IIM, Indian Institute of Integrated Medicine. I'm not sure how many in this room have ever visited that. We just crossed the gate. This is the India's oldest drug research institute, founded in 1942, much before independence. And even today, we have 2 exclusive research projects going on. One is that of the cannabis-based painkillers. If we succeed, we are going to be the world suppliers of drugs which will come handy in malignancies, in neuropathies, etc. The second project is multi-drug resistance tuberculosis. So I out of my own curiosity, because this cannabis project was brought by me with a lot of effort, because you can't even do such projects because they are drug abuse drugs. So I was there and I asked them, have you ever sought any collaboration with the GMC? They said, no, we have not met. I said, you know who's the principal? I said, I asked male or female? He said, no. At least they didn't say transgender. So then I called out Dr. Shashi. I said, I'll sit here and you please come. And I'm glad. And I suggested to her, I said, why can't we have a thesis on pharmacology? University grant says that the guide has to be from the parent institute, co-guide can be from elsewhere. So if you have co-guide, at least the boys would know what is happening here. It's got a lot to do with the kind of practice that they are going to do in the times to come. And then she said that we are now going to initiate that. Similarly, cannabis. It could be a thesis for neurologists, for MD medicines, even for pharmacology. So unless we integrate at least among ourselves within the vicinity, we would be depriving ourselves of what each other is doing. So I think a small, humble request that I can make is that at least look around to the institutes which are just located in just 4 kilometer radius of yours. And not only that, I got AIMS Jammu to do an MOU, which is a rather multiple MOU, with also IIM, also IIT, because all your technology is being developed in IIT. And all the marketing is done by IIM, the startup marketing. So if we integrate, we will be able to bring out the best amongst us. And I think that is something, if we are able to move in that direction, because that also has a huge bearing on preventive health care, which is going to be our priority, and the Modi government gives a huge priority. Modi government has given focus to preventive health care. And rightly so. When Prime Minister keeps reiterating, you must be hearing every now and then when he says Amrit Kal, we have entered into 25 years. 25 years from now, when independent India celebrates its 100th birthday, when it reaches that pedestal in 2047, who are the people, who are the Indians or the citizens who are going to be the architects of, or who are going to determine the face of that India in 2047? It is the youth today. So when we talk of preventive health care, we are not talking so in the terms of health management, we are talking in the terms of our responsibilities to nation building. So can we allow and afford the youth to squander away their energies, their potentials in incapacitating complications, whether it be on account of diabetes mellitus or other? Because if we expect them to put in their entire potential, their entire energy, their entire capacities in the building of 2047 India, we owe it to the nation, we owe it to India to ensure that. And for that, again, Indian data hugely, and to some extent an optimum balance between the clinical and the technology. I wish I could stay long, but I am being signaled I have to rush because I have to move to Mumbai. I hope to come back again, not as a chief guest, but as a faculty speaker. And to Suman, thank you. Most of the delegates who have come here may not have come exactly for you. They might have come for Vaishno Devi. So I, being an elected member of parliament, can offer to you, if there's any assistance, any facilitation required from my end, you can please, you're free to contact our office. We'll be happy to do that. Thank you.
प्राणी से परमात्मा की ओर एक प्यार and other dignitaries on stage to proceed for last. Thank you, sir. That have accomplished recognition in the services that span across all.
On the dais, our very dynamic principal, Dr. Shashi Sudan. Just as COVID came as an adversity and brought out the virtue out of us, I think COVID also brought out the best out of her. We saw her working during the most difficult times. बधाई के पात्र हैं यहाँ के प्रिंसिपल डॉक्टर शशि सूदन, एंडोक्रिनोलॉजी विभाग की ओर से, जिसके साथ हमारा व्यक्तिगत भी जुड़ाव रहा कई वर्षों तक, कई दशकों तक, उनकी ओर से इस गोष्ठी का आयोजन किया गया है थायराइड को लेकर के। और इसका महत्व इसलिए भी बढ़ जाता है कि वर्तमान में प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी ने पहली बार भारतवर्ष में स्वास्थ्य सेवाओं को, प्रिवेंटिव हेल्थ केयर को बहुत अधिक प्राथमिकता देने का काम किया है, जो शायद पिछली सरकारों से कहीं ना कहीं छूट गया था। और जिस प्रकार कोविड की आपदा के दौरान भारतवर्ष में मात्र 2 वर्षों के भीतर 2 वैक्सीन तैयार किए गए बायोटेक्नोलॉजी विभाग की ओर से, DNA वैक्सीन, नेज़ल वैक्सीन, न केवल अपनी तरह के पहले दुनिया में बल्कि विश्व के अन्य देशों को भी उपलब्ध करवाए गए। वो इसीलिए संभव हुआ कि प्रधानमंत्री की ओर से जिस प्रकार का प्रोत्साहन, सहयोग और सहायता हमें उपलब्ध हुई, उसने भारत की छिपी हुई प्रतिभा को दुनिया के आगे रखा और ये प्रमाणित कर दिया कि भारत में प्रतिभा की, योग्यता की, परिश्रम की कोई कमी नहीं। शायद कहीं ना कहीं उस प्रकार की नीति निर्धारकों के स्तर पर प्राथमिकता के अभाव था और प्रधानमंत्री मोदी के नेतृत्व में ये हमें सफलता प्राप्त हुई। आने वाले वर्षों में, जैसे कि मोदी जी बार बार कहते हैं कि अमृतकाल का समय है 25 वर्ष, और आज से 25 वर्ष के बाद सन 2047 में आज़ाद हिंदुस्तान अपनी 100वीं सालगिरह मनाएगा और भारत शिखर पटल पर खड़ा होगा। तो प्रिवेंटिव हेल्थ केयर न केवल हमारा एक स्वास्थ्य सेवाओं की दृष्टि से एक दायित्व बनता है, बल्कि एक आम नागरिक की ओर से भी, क्योंकि आज का युवा अगले 25 वर्षों में राष्ट्र निर्माण में अपनी सेवाएं, अपना प्रतिभा, अपनी योग्यता, अपनी क्षमता समर्पित करने की स्थिति में होगा। और इसलिए उसकी स्वास्थ्य की देखरेख करना और उसे बीमारियों से रोकथाम करना, ताकि वो अपनी ऊर्जा और अपनी क्षमता को पूरी तरह से राष्ट्र निर्माण में लगा सके, ये हम सबका साझा दायित्व है।